All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us again for our final session. I'm evaluating Atlanta's proposed tree protection ordinance. And we should start by thanking you for joining us and being interested in improving the ordinance and for all the work that you're doing as community members and staff and other organizations. I want to start off by just introducing myself. Again, my name is Greg Levine. I'm one of the co-executive directors at Trees Atlanta, focusing on the program side. And my background is in landscape architecture. And I am a certified arborist. And I've been at Trees Atlanta for 26 years. I did start my career off working in landscape design work and often tree protection plans and recompense formulas and all of that for a couple of years. With that said, we are looking forward to continuing to work on this over the next month. And I'm going to introduce Judy. Judy Yee is our marketing communications director, and we are the two staff people that are focusing on working on the tree ordinance. Judy? Judy, you're on mute.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you for joining us today. And as a quick overview of what will happen in this hour, for those of you who have joined us in the previous three, this will look familiar. We will do a fast recap of the topics that we covered in session 1, 2, and 3. Please remember that each of these seminars have been recorded and the slides are presented for you to access at any time. It is on our website under news. And I will also share with you a link to that particular blog post when you receive a follow-up to this seminar. Greg will review how we got to our evaluation and our recommendations, and I will discuss the framework for our discussion. This is a very complex ordinance, and it is articulated in what we call an impact chart. I will just show you that and explain how it works for us and how it guides our discussion. Lastly, this is the 4th session. The last of the 23 standards that we have been discussing will be covered. And as I noted earlier, that we will probably have extra time for Q&A today, and we will talk about the next steps leading up to City Council vote. So going over session 1, this is a glimpse of the impact chart that I mentioned. I will explain in a moment how to read this. This was covered in session 1, and the recording and slides are again provided on our website. Session 2, we covered these topics. We chose the sequence partially for logical sequence. You needed to understand session 1 topics in order for us to really articulate our recommendations for session 2 topics. Last week, we went over many big topics, including commercial development. You may want to refer to that video and slides, including the details that we provided for the Urban Forest Master Plan. Lastly, today, we are going to go over all of these topics. It looks a little overwhelming, but I promise you we'll be able to cover it. Many of these are procedural and reinforcement of many of the concepts that we've already covered earlier. So let's get started. In this webinar, one of the things that I will say is that we are working against a timeline, as Greg indicated. It's changed a little bit. During the months of March and April, those of you who have participated in your local MPU meetings may have already been presented a fee assessment document, that it is a non-voting document. And if you do attend those meetings, it is available for you for comment only. What that is since there is a fee change in this proposed ordinance, the city was required to do an assessment to justify that value of that fee change. That fee change was around a recompense value. The dollars per inch were changed from $30 per inch to $240 per inch. That particular fee assessment document will explain how the city got to that value, and it reflects the true cost of replacing a tree. On April 27th, the committee that's responsible for rewriting this ordinance will be meeting and finalizing their recommendations to be sent up to full city council. Matt Westmoreland is the chair of that committee, and we will encourage you and give you some talking points for reaching out to them should you want to do that following this last meeting. Lastly, it was scheduled that the City Council would vote on this ordinance on May 3rd. We did receive notification last week that they believe that the City Council has rescheduled that vote for May 17th. This date might continue to change. So please keep a close eye on that particular vote date, and we'll do our best to communicate to everyone who's participated in one of these webinars any new news that we find out. As a matter of housekeeping, we will not be monitoring chat in this webinar, but we will be taking questions through Q&A. At the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A that you should type in your questions, and we will answer as many of those that we can in this webinar. Should we, for some reason, run out of time or are not able to answer those questions today, we will follow up with you separately or post the answers to our website. We have been able to answer all the questions in the prior 3 sessions, so please do consider dropping in your question at any moment, and we'll answer them at the end. And of course, take a note of our addresses. They're very simple: judy@treesatlanta.org or greg@treesatlanta.org. We'll be happy to take your questions following these webinars. And if you would like to invite us to talk to your neighborhood or your MPU, we've already spoken to a number of them this week. I'd be glad to schedule that with you. Greg, you're on mute.
I just want to remind everybody that Trees Atlanta does believe that that this proposed ordinance has a path forward. That we believe it has a good approach on balancing guidelines with incentives. With that said, we still believe there needs to be more field testing, actual tree protection plans that are and recompense that has been tested on both the old ordinance and the new ordinance, and that we can take that data to see if the proposed ordinance is actually doing what we want it to do. But Trees Atlanta also has numerous amendments in order for Trees Atlanta to continue to support the proposed ordinance. Sorry if I said that correctly. We believe that you have to have numerous amendments for us to continue to support the proposed ordinance moving forward. One of the things that we found, and that we've heard a lot from other individuals, is that it's a long ordinance. It is complex. Most new ordinances are, and working on and looking at other tree ordinances, often they are complex and they're all different from different cities and counties. But once it gets established, we do believe people get used to using it, and it will work well. But with that said, it could use some structural fixes. And the other piece is that we really feel like a smaller kind of companion guide to kind of the short way of implementing a recompense plan, basically to help that roll out and people get used to it. So that's something that would be very helpful. So our next steps are that we've already shared our 23 or our amendments to our 23 standards of the ordinance. We've already shared that with Matt Westmoreland, and we, for the most part, won't be making major changes to it, but we're still open to tweaking some things here and there on our recommendations. So how do you evaluate whether the ordinance is good? How do we evaluate it? We look at these 3 components. Preservation. Is the new ordinance preserving more trees for the most part? I mean, it may not always preserve more trees, but is it preserving more trees overall? Replanting. Is the replanting actually improved? Does it require trees to be replaced? Does it require trees to live a long life, to maximize their size? And then recompense. When trees aren't preserved enough, does recompense balance that? Does the recompense fee help push the preservation of more trees? These are the main criteria that you would look at, both the past ordinance and the new proposed ordinance, and compare and see if the new ordinance is doing what we want it to. We've been doing this a lot already with working with other nonprofits, the city itself, advocacy groups, individuals, and also landscape architecture firms that do the most implementation of recompense plans. Again, we are looking at doing these, believing this field testing needs to be done both in residential and in commercial development, not one or the other, but both, and seeing that it works best in both areas, not just one.
So we'll start with this, return to this image that we started with. This is what we call an impact chart. I wanted to give you a glance at it, and I'm going to move away from it and come back to it after the explanation. You'll notice a few things, that there is a y-axis and an x-axis that indicate some favorable dimensions. And you'll note there's 3 colors on it, and I'll go over that. So on the horizontal axis, or the x-axis, we evaluate whether or not we think that particular standard will have a higher or lower likelihood to protect or improve our overall canopy. The more closer it is to the right side, the more we think it has a higher likelihood. There's some standards that have been changed are really on a policy level, and we try to place those standards on an up and down scale to indicate policy impact. This includes community support and feasibility of implementation. Third, the scale of the bubble, the sizes of the bubble that you saw on that image indicates how many trees we think will be impacted. Some are very large, including the one for conservation of preserved forest. For example, Lake Charlotte, which was recently acquired, represents 215 acres, and we estimate there's about 65,000 trees on it. So purchasing of forested land can have a tremendous impact. The status of our support is indicated in color. Yellow indicates that it's pretty good as is. Blue indicates that it's mostly good with some changes that we recommend. And the remaining that are mostly filled in on the impact scale are white with white dots. These indicate the standards that require some critical changes for us to provide support. So if the amendments that we will go over with you are taken by the city and show up in the final report, what you just saw, the bubble starting to move across the screen, indicates that they did incorporate them, and we can provide greater endorsement of those changes. The more that moves over to the right and changes color from white to blue will help us evaluate the ordinance overall. We might not get every single bubble crammed up into that upper right-hand corner, but if the body of the ordinance becomes stronger, we will likely support more fully. But if very few or none of these amendments are accepted, we will withdraw our conditional support. And some of you may have received an email from us, if you're on our mailing list, stating Trees Atlanta's statement on our conditional report. It was picked up by the media, and many of you guys have shared it with your networks and friends, and we appreciate that. And so let's start talking about the last set of recommendations on the proposed ordinance. These will be the 4 topics that we covered today, and let's quickly start. First, sorry about that, Greg, if you start.
Well, so everybody, one other way that we could conditionally support the ordinance if we don't get as many amendment changes as we'd like to see is that we see enough data pool that shows the ordinance is working. So if it can be proven that the ordinance is working without these amended changes, then we can still possibly support the ordinance as an organization. All right, so we're first going to talk about dead, dying, and hazardous. So dead, dying, and hazardous trees is one of the challenges that we've seen quite a bit when the trees are often designated in DDH and people don't understand why. And sometimes, you know, there's some challenges in that from an operation standpoint. So the proposed ordinance is creating a standard operating procedures, and they're publishing it. It's already been posted on the city's website. So it's a great start, actually, so that people can see why trees are designated as DDH, and it's very specific. Also requires assessment by a registered tree professional or city arborist, which I believe is currently required. And that all DDH removal permits shall be available for public inspection on the Arborist Division website. So any DDH will be posted that it is a DDH tree. Simple as that. Our recommended amendments are that trees should not be approved as DDH if they can be remedied by a prescription, meaning if they have a pest that can be dealt with, or if they can get a fertilization treatment, or if they can be pruned, then they don't get DDH if the tree can be, basically its health can be stabilized. That very specific change. And require a self-posted notice permit number when any trees is being removed. So let's say at your house, you're removing a dead, dying, and hazardous tree. Your arborist comes, first thing he does is post the permit number on a standard sheet that you can print from, they can print and just write the sheet. And maybe it has the website that people can go straight to double check it. But that we believe would really clarify that it is a DDH and would not waste individuals' time or people calling the city or Trees Atlanta to make sure that it is a DDH, which happens very regularly. We really feel strongly about that. And then administratively, we'd like to see all DDH that are being removed recorded in a CELA, regardless of how or why that tree is being removed. Basically, if it's an emergency and a tree needs to be removed, it still gets put back in the CELA. So that there's a record of why trees have been removed, no matter the situation or circumstance. And having the details of it was removed because it had a root rot fungus or it had moved in a storm, whatever that reason would be. That would move our support to turning it to blue and move it to the right. It's a pretty big circle, as you can see as well.
Yeah, and to add to that, Greg, the fact that during this process, since they first released the proposed TPO, they did post details on the standard operating procedures, which was the main body of our request. So they already have begun responding to it and posting that. So please take a look at that on the city website, and I will make sure that you get a link if you can't find it, because sometimes it's buried.
The registered tree professionals. All right, so it's a long one here, but the proposed ordinance has all arborists and tree companies wishing to do work in the city. That includes any, for any construction project, requires a permit, basically, are required to become a registered tree professional and must assert that they will abide by the TPO. I believe this is, and we may be corrected on this, this is for construction projects and actually work permits, where you're actually building something. I don't believe this is for somebody pruning your trees, but city may correct me on that. There is no fee to apply. It is a free service. They do want an annual registration for the simplicity for the city. Must provide documentation, basically that an ISA or a certified arborist, licensed forester, you must provide the documentation that you have one of those on your staff and that they sign off on it. And any tree survey or site plan submitted for permitting must include the signature of a registered tree professional. So not only must you have on staff, they have to sign off for that removal or that tree protection plan or whatever it might be. So an interesting thing, they are starting to improve the violations. The first violation is a warning. The second violation is 1 month suspension. A third is a 6-month suspension, and a fourth is a 12-month suspension. So basically, if you don't put up a tree protection fencing, then you're the arborist in charge, then you get a suspension. Or if you miscommunicated a tree safe area, that might be also a violation. There's probably a lot of different violations that you could actually do. So our major recommendations are to increase the period of registration to 2 years, just to give the arborist a little bit of break on a renewal process. We understand the city likes the annual because it's easier for them to keep up with. We believe that if you have excessive repeated violations, basically if you end up having 5 violations, that you get a 5-year suspension. You know, you think you would figure it out after 2 or 3. So if you get to 5, you really aren't interested in protecting trees or basically following the ordinance, at least in our viewpoint. And lastly, unpermitted removal of any regulated trees counts as 2 violations. So basically, if you remove a tree that was regulated, then you jump from, if it's your first violation, you jump all the way to 2 instant violations. If you do it twice, you're at 4 violations. That would move our support.
That one actually just kind of keeps it there.
Keeps it there. Sorry, that would keep it there at blue. Not quite gold yet, but that would keep it at blue. Next thing we're going to talk about is deterrence and enforcement. So in the proposed ordinance, the city will continue to fine for illegal tree removal, but because of Georgia law, it is limited to, I think it's limited to $1,000 per fine. They can't get around that. So really they're trying to figure out ways to better enforce the law and to create deterrence, like increasing recompense. And one of the other major pieces is that they're going to increase the arborist staffing to help implement this ordinance that's going to protect trees more, or hopes to protect trees more. They need more staffing. And right now, police can issue a citation for illegal tree activity, but they can do that now. So it really hasn't changed. It's still part of the policy of the ordinance, or the ordinance. Some of our recommended changes is that we hear over and over from community members all the time that there's a lot of weekend tree removal, and sometimes evening, but more weekend, and that we need to have procedures for the police or city to follow when there's weekend removals. Because right now, from individual policemen to policemen, some of them understand, are more aware, and others are not. So they need to have a standard. And establish a single exemption process that applies to the TPO. From a legal standpoint, they have to phrase that there's an exemptions, but we see that there's too many exemptions throughout the ordinance and believe that it should be in there one time, saying there are exemptions for purpose of sometimes you just need them, but not necessarily need to put it after every part of the ordinance, reminding people, oh, you can somehow get out of this. So we really believe you mention it once and move on. Some more administrative issues we'd like to see improvement on are more public education and easy to understand, accessible guide to follow the TPO. I had mentioned that earlier. Just basically a short version, and a little more education documents around it. Also, we would like to see a tracking system for the 311 tickets. I know many of us have called in an issue where fencing is not there, or we see digging devices getting into the critical root zones, and there's no resolution for closing up that ticket. At least they don't state what the resolution was, and we would like to see that they state the reason or what happened to resolve the issue, or if they said it was okay. And it's basically just it's good service to kind of respond to people who are making the effort to call in an issue as a community person and actually respond back. And lastly, clarify penalties for citation and standard operations procedures for the police. Really want to have something that they can use and supports them to do their job. Of course, the police probably would rather not have this be part of their job, but if they're going to have it, then we need to make it clear and easy for them to respond. We also, go ahead. So that would move, if we could get all those things done, it would move it to the right. We really believe this could help preserve a lot more trees if we can figure out a way to manage it better. The last thing I'm going to talk about is the fencing and protection for construction. So the proposed ordinance requires chain link fencing for protecting priority trees in the front yard during construction. That is the only place that they're requiring chain link fencing. Trees Atlanta believes, and many other community people believe, that chain link fencing is the best way to keep construction out of tree critical root zones. And we believe that it should be fixed in place, meaning posts in soil versus a fence that can be moved around, which they often use for construction projects. And that we believe that fencing, chain link fencing, should be used for any developer that has been cited for a tree violation within 2 years. So if a developer got cited in the previous project for not meeting the tree ordinance, some part of it on site, then they have to use chain link fencing. We also believe that trees on any commercial project should also require chain link fencing. There's a lot of construction equipment, a lot more vehicles. It's a little bit heavier development, and the best way to protect those trees is fencing. And then lastly, conservation areas. When these conservation areas are created, you've got to keep everything out of it. And the orange fencing is too easy just to throw things over or to run through. So and once conservation area has been basically run into, it's basically destroyed. You've destroyed that percentage of the conservation area. So that should also be chain link fencing, basically permanent. We don't see concrete for the posts, but maybe on a, that might be something to consider on a developer that continues to basically not follow the tree ordinance.
Okay. Pardon me.
Really important for protecting more trees. By doing these things, we think it would move gold and would also help from a policy impact as well.
So now we're going to cover a couple of topics at once that they're related: the Tree Trust Fund and a fund for tree removal, which is a new addition. So before we dive into that, I realized that we should talk about the Tree Conservation Commission, which is an organization that that helps with the compliance with all the standards that we're talking about. The proposed ordinance includes, and this is pretty much the way it is today, with just a few tiny changes. Remember that the Tree Conservation Commission is comprised of volunteers appointed by the mayor or city council, the regular everyday citizens. Some are reserved for landscape architects, other arborists, other builders. There's certain roles that they're trying to do to create a body that will be able to hear tree-related topics, because the TCC are responsible for hearing and ruling on tree ordinance variance requests and the appeals. They're also going to be asked to determine how financial hardship is defined. And in various places throughout the ordinance, financial hardship is a requirement for the waiving of certain fees and to qualify for certain services. They receive financial reports related to the Tree Trust Fund, which we'll get in a moment, and they provide guidance on tree. They should be providing guidance on tree-related education programming, because education programming is funded by the Tree Trust Fund. They also designate and maintain the Heritage Tree Program. The Heritage Tree Program is a new one that I'll briefly talk about later. Now, as I said, a lot of this is already included in the current ordinance. But one of the things that a lot of tree advocates have pointed out and causes a lot of problems is that even though it's in the ordinance, a lot of it has not been complete. So the Tree Conservation Commission needs to be empowered to have more oversight and more reporting, so that all the things that are intended to happen in the ordinance actually do happen. For example, some of our recommended amendments is that the Tree Conservation Commission should be involved in providing comments and recommendations to city planning for any project that's funded by the Tree Trust Fund. So they need to be at the table prior to the actual funding and approval of these projects. They should also provide an annual report or summary of issues that were raised by residents and permit holders and return it to the city. Since they are hearing all of these variance requests and appeals, and they're often providing advice to the public, it will be a great management tool and analysis tool for the Tree Conservation Commission to also report to the city and the public. Vice versa, we believe that the department should also provide an annual report back to the Tree Conservation Commission to report on the accomplishments and actual outcomes of any project funded by the funded by the Tree Trust Fund. There are a lot of acronyms in here, so bear with me. So let's talk about that Tree Trust Fund. For those of you who might not know what the Tree Trust Fund is, the Tree Trust Fund is almost like an escrow for all the money that's collected for recompense. So all the balances of money that come in when things are getting permitted and they pay for the removal of healthy trees are collected in this fund. The proposed ordinance says that the Tree Trust Fund can pay for planting, purchasing forests, restoration work, tree care work, tree education, and some staff. Excuse me. This fund is managed by the Commissioner of Department of City Planning. There's a nuance to this. The Tree Trust Fund has always been the responsibility of the Department of City Planning, but there was also a parallel effort in the last year or so by another tree advocacy group, and they did a really deep dive into the Tree Trust Fund. They engaged hundreds of hours into this effort, hired auditors and forensic accountants, and did an incredible job in identifying how that Tree Trust Fund was being used. And it was accepted by the city. The city did their own audit, and they already have made accommodations based upon all the errors that they found. So one of the errors that they indicated was that it was not clear exactly who managed the Tree Trust Fund. So it wasn't by intent, but probably by oversight and lack of clarity that the funds were allocated to the wrong unapproved items. So it's very important, including in our amendments, we'll address this. And we know that there's been a lot of thought on this Tree Trust Fund. So we hope the city will take into consideration those things that have been submitted. Now, I said that some staff can be funded by the Tree Trust Fund. The city has many arborists, both in city planning and in the Department of Parks and Recreation. The ordinance specifies only a small number of those arborists and staff can be funded by the Tree Trust Fund, that escrow we talked about. They have not yet given us a detail in the proposed ordinance on who and what numbers and the amount of dollars that's going to go in there. So we still need to see that from the city. Lastly, one of the new things that have changed about what can be spent on the Tree Trust Fund is a provision to fund DDH tree removal for households that have financial hardship. This was a very important provision that we heard from the public and many of our city council members. And we do believe that although we want to preserve as much money in the Tree Trust Fund for its intended purpose, which is replanting and preserving existing forests, we understand that there is a community need, and this reflects that. That particular fund is allocated at $200,000 per year, and it can only be used for financial hardship to remove DDH trees. And one of the provisions says, if you receive one of this hardship case removal, that property must replant at least one replacement tree for each DDH removed. So our recommended amendments regarding the Tree Trust Fund include that it needs to be very, very clear that this fund should be prioritized to be used for purchase and protection of forested land. That provision is already included, that the city can buy land for conservation, but we want to make sure that this is done as quickly as possible, both identifying potential purchases and actually closing on those purchases, because this opportunity is quickly disappearing, as we all know. The other prioritization area is tree planting. The whole concept of a recompense is to accommodate the fact that if trees are not preserved and there's no way to replant it on site, there is a fund for replanting elsewhere. Therefore, we believe that this fund should be majority allocated for the purchase of land or tree planting. As guidance, for example, we say if actual expenses for purchase of land or tree planting is less than 70% in any given year, let's say, the next budget must be corrected so that it will include at least 70%. Now that number might shift here and there because we have not seen the revenue projections from the city yet of what these changes might be from the, and what the recompense values, what the tree trust fund total balance will be. So we hope that this intention and this guideline is accepted by the city, and then where it finally lands, we'll see in the final document. So in the similar line, we say that no more than half of all city arborists should be paid from the tree trust fund. The other half should be paid by the general fund, just like other city staff. And if there's something that, if that percentage kind of goes off, we think that that particular activity should trigger a reevaluation of who's being paid out of the tree trust fund. And then if it grows because of the growth of salary or the growth of the overall number of city arborists makes it that more than 20% of the tree trust fund that's collected in the previous year are being used for staffing, we would like an audit or a reevaluation of that budget. This is just to ensure that the money is being used for the intended purpose. The next item is that the Tree Conservation Commission and the Department of Parks and Recreation should review and comment on the budget and expenditures for all public projects, all of them. They should be partners in it. We know that they can't manage the fund, but they should be given full oversight duties and the ability to do so. Lastly, going back to that DDH tree removal funding, we would like to recommend a small adjustment to clarify that if that funding is used from the tree trust fund, it is limited to removals for a tree if there's a permanent structure that is a target. So if it's going to fall on a building, or if it's going to fall on some other, your garage, that is considered a target, or it prevents safe access to the home. We wanted to make sure that it's not being used for any tree on the lot. If there's a DDH on the lot and it's somewhere where there isn't a target, we don't believe that it should be covered by this particular funding, or at least prioritize all the applications so that it's first spent for any homes where the permanent structure is the target. We think that that particular funding should also be used to allow strategic pruning. So not all trees are presenting a risk because the whole thing needs to come down. It might be a limb that can be limbed up, or a certain pruning that can be done to reduce the risk, and that might satisfy that particular risk. And lastly, we believe that if any of this $200,000 per year is not used in any given year, that the balance is returned to the tree trust fund, that it doesn't roll over. So with those changes, we would be more pleased with these particular provisions, but our evaluation on their impact still remains the same. Lastly, we're going to go over these three last orange bubbles. We indicated that we are already supporting it, so this is a rather fast review. These are the three things that we will support without tons of amendments. In fact, there's only one. But I did want to describe to you, for those of you who might not understand what these are, conservation of forested areas means that the city can use the funds from the Tree Trust Fund to identify parcels with certain requirements, not, there's a size requirement, there's a density requirement, etc., that the funds can be used to purchase and restore forested land for permanent conservation. We strongly advocate for this particular standard. Invasive vine removal. So as you recall in one of our earlier sessions, in order for a tree to be counted in your site density, you must remove any invasive vine on that tree. If invasive vines are taking over that tree, it doesn't exist for site density. So they require that removal. One amendment that we would like to add to that particular standard is once they remove the vine, that the vine should be spot treated with an herbicide to ensure that it doesn't regrow in the next few years. And many people prefer not to use herbicides, so that then they have to manually remove the root. Either way will solve the situation. It's a small amendment to that. And lastly, the Heritage Tree Program. It is a new program. although it is an iteration of an existing concept that's in the current ordinance, but this is a formal program that they have proposed and we're fine with it. It requires, if there's a tree that's notable in age or size or some historic feature or it's placed in the landscape, it can be nominated to become a heritage tree. In order for it to be approved to be a heritage tree, there are requirements for that tree, but most importantly, the property owner has to consent. One of the benefits of being identified as a heritage tree is that healthy heritage trees cannot be removed without the approval of the Tree Conservation Commission, not TCC, but and then lastly, once they are approved as heritage trees, they're always considered priority trees. So believe it or not, that ends our 23 standards. I know that was super, super exciting. And then you can always refer back to the other recordings and the slides. I'll post this immediately after this. And if I get distracted, definitely by tomorrow morning. So with that, let's wrap up, Greg.
So, again, just to wrap up, we do believe that there's a path forward with the proposed ordinance, and we believe that it either needs to have a number of amendments made, or that there's data that shows that the proposed ordinance is going to do the trick in preserving trees. If you have any questions or any helpful hints or suggestions, please send an email to Judy or myself. You can see the email here. If you can attend your neighborhood or MPU meeting with when the TPO will be discussed, you know, explaining what's going on with the ordinance and sharing if you want to support our amendments, or if you want to support that the city needs to show that they're going to preserve trees in the new ordinance, then please do. But attending your neighborhoods and letting them know that there will be a vote in May would be a good thing to do. And you can write or call your city council member with the quote here. Basically, the new ordinance has to save more trees and replant better when it's not possible. Recommend should increase to fund future canopy. And if you will support the approval of the new ordinance with the amendments recommended by Trees Atlanta, blah, blah, blah. But that's a suggestion for you. And keep informed through Trees Atlanta's newsletter or in our website. And we will continue to pass on messages to all of those that are signed up with Trees Atlanta. And if you missed a series, I noticed a couple of the questions that were answered in a previous series. Please go to our website and you can catch the 4-part series, a statement on our conditional support, and more information on is this new draft good. So with that said, I think we should go into the questions and answers, Judy, unless you want to.
Yeah, I have one thing, Greg, that I'd like to do before we do that Q&A. Thank you for the wrap up. You know, this is a question that we asked in the first session. I'd like to ask it again. Could you take a moment while Greg and I look through the Q&A to answer a couple of questions? I have this first one, if you could answer, which is, which ordinances have you read? Have you read the current city ordinance that's in effect? Have you read the new proposed city ordinance? Have you read another group's ordinance? Have you read the summary of one or more of the versions, or none of the above? We'll leave that up for a little bit while everyone answers, and I will share the results, and while Greg and I kind of eyeball the Q&As, and we will start with that. Okay, I am going to end the poll in 3, 2, 1. And this is what you guys said. It looks like very similar to what we saw before, that about half of you guys are ordinance lovers and you've read them all. And then the majority have read summaries, and of course that some of you have not been able to read any of them. We understand it is long and good for insomnia. Okay, let's see, stop sharing this result. And I have one, and then we'll move on to the Q&A, and then I will end the session with one more poll. So let's move on, Greg.
Okay.
Let's
question one.
I'm going to start at the top.
Yep, start at the top.
Okay, and the first question was, I do believe I saw this one come in first. Brenda asked, do you think the new TPO will discourage developers, builders from doing business in the city of Atlanta?
I don't think it will discourage most developers from doing business in Atlanta. Where there's money to be made, development will happen, and there's going to be money to be made in Atlanta. And I think one of the things we heard early on, or at least we were told, that developers said they just want a very specific, clear ordinance so they know exactly what to do so they can move forward and do their business.
Okay. I think the rest, it might go out of sequence because of thumbs up, but we'll go to the top. Martha asks, citizens need to have oversight on trust fund. We have already seen how it is being used as a slush fund. It should not be used for salaries and equipment, but for purchasing wooded land and education. So as I noted, one of the important outcomes of the citizens group, or the actually it was a Tree Next Door that led that yeoman's effort to get that audit done. One of the things that they revealed was that it was not being managed, really. It's a little shocking, but because there wasn't a specific single manager of it, a lot of people were using that funding. In their words, they don't think it was intentional. It was just mismanagement. Whether or not what the cause is the past, and one of the things that's good about a very specific ordinance that says who's responsible for what, and they've named the commissioner of the Department of City Planning as the person responsible for it. Moving forward, they will be held accountable that the things that the ordinance says are complied with. Anything to add to that, Greg?
Well, and to add on, I think that's why we had some of our percentages that we think should be included without micromanaging the city, just giving some strong support on making sure the majority of the money goes towards both buying forest and preserving, and tree planting as well. Right,
and then our recommendations and many other recommendations are kind of specifying and strengthening the role of the Tree Conservation Commission. They are an oversight organization. They don't manage the fund, but they should be treated like advisors, a board of counsel, so that they are given more frequent reports and are given opportunity to input on that. We do know that some reports that are indicated that should be given to the TCC have not been given to them on a regular basis. So with this refresh, with this new ordinance, one of the things that we all need to be responsible for is asking for accountability. So let's go on to the next one. Chet says, the most egregious part of the city TPO is allowing builders and developers to cut 50% of priority trees off the top without recompense, permits, or appeals. I noticed that TA version keeps the same approach in place. Why? AMDA is a choice, but no one would choose this method. The citizens, okay, before I go on to the second part, I do want to clarify that there's some factual errors in that particular question. And I'm not sure if I'm misreading it, but I do want to make sure that this isn't quite what the ordinance says. The first part says allows developers to cut 50% of priority trees off the top without recompense, permits, and appeals. That is not correct according to the ordinance. That might be mixing up a couple of standards. One of the key changes in the ordinance was that there is a priority tree preservation standard. That is the standard that all single-family home properties have to meet. How much of the existing priority trees you need to preserve to receive incentives. The 50% number represents the tiniest size lot in the city of Atlanta. It has to be less than keep me honest, Greg. I have so many numbers in the
less than 1/10 of an acre.
Yeah, less than 1/10 of an acre. We looked at the current land use in the city of Atlanta. And I think something like 3% of the land is in this particular zoning. So there's a minor number of properties that actually can, that have a low preservation standard as 50. The majority of the land is 60% all the way up to 75%, meaning in the largest lots, the standard says you have to preserve 75% of the priority tree.
Well, and the other thing that needs to be corrected here, Judy, is that there has to be recompense if
Correct.
a priority tree is removed.
Correct. Yeah.
They start off with a discount, as we've discussed in previous sessions, 25% discount, and then another discount if they save enough priority trees. And the Trees Atlanta has recommended that you start with no discount. So, right. So we don't support that level right now.
And it's important to say that all trees that are removed, regardless of where it's located, if they all are subject to recompense or replanting, all of them. How much that calculation does fluctuate depending upon certain incentive standards that you meet. But instead of, we won't go into that definition, please refer to session 1 where we go into that. Appeals, that part of it is true. The current ordinance says that if you meet the priority tree preservation standard, that you can you are excused from doing a couple of things. One is posting a yellow open for appeal sign, and that no one can appeal that particular removal except for the abutting neighbors. It was one of our recommendations that we would like for that to be amended. We think that the appeals process should be open to the MPU level. So we agree with you on that one. So I know that this is such a complex number of moving parts, so I hope that's been clear. And then the last one is AMDA is a choice, but no one would choose this method. It isn't a choice, actually. If you don't meet the tree preservation standards, you must meet the AMDA. It is not a choice. And then lastly, the citizens version makes changes to this that allows cutting trees, yes, you know, no one gets a free ride in this. And just for time, I thought we would have more time for Q&A, but we do have a number, so I'm going to go ahead and in chat, if we haven't addressed your question fully, please send me an email and we will make sure we do that. What is the reason that TA is proposing a whole different TPO rather than okay, so sorry for those listening. We are not proposing a whole different TPO. In fact, this is the premise of what we're doing, is that the only ordinance that's on the table for a vote is a proposed ordinance that's submitted to the City Council back in January. What we've done over the last 4 sessions is provide recommendations for amendments to the city's proposed ordinance. We do realize that the citizens group have come up with a whole new ordinance of their own. And I believe they've called it the blended version or the citizens version. We think it's great. All input to the city that improves the ordinance is super. But we as an organization have opted to say, here's a document that you've provided to the public, and we've pinpointed areas and specific amendments we'd like to see to that document. And that's how we are moving forward.
And Judy, I'd like to add, you know, the most diverse contingency and complete information. Well, Trees Atlanta has 15 to 20,000 people that we hear from in different ways and that we share information with. So I kind of disagree with that as well.
Well, you know, I think I understand. I mean, you know, the citizens group invited Trees Atlanta to participate. We made ourselves available to them as a resource for input. We did review several of their versions. In the end, we decided that the most functional way for us to move forward was to make these very particular amendments. And actually, when we have been doing landscape scanning of many groups who have inputted, many individuals and many professionals who have inputted. And so we did we kind of came up with a list and said, are any Are we off on the left or the right on any particular standard? And overall, with as many changes as the ordinance has provided, we found that most of the groups are moving in the same direction. There are going to be some things that are slightly different. That's what the beauty of it is how we can all input to make this a better ordinance. So we believe it's a good thing that we do have such engagement and then people are moving forward. So at the end of the day, all of us think there are some changes that are needed, and we've presented the 23 standards and how we like to recommend. Oh, and it says here that wasn't Chet, it was, anyway, let me go on to the next one. I'm gonna skip over this one just to make sure I get a few more voices and I'll come back to this question. Dalil say, I worry that the tree registration process only keeps the honest tree cutters honest. The rogue tree cutters who violate the registration process will only suffer a misdemeanor fine no greater than $1,000, correct? Correct, Dalil. That is a state law that they cannot get around. So that is why I believe the registration process got created. That is something that the ordinance could do, which was say, if you're not a registered tree professional, you can't work in the city of Atlanta. The next question is, I'm sorry.
Yeah, their orders changing and for odd reasons I don't understand.
Yeah, it's difficult. I'm sorry if I miss anything. What can be done about builders, developers who put up a tall, opaque fence around a property, then proceed to clear cut the lot, removing any speck of green formerly seen there? There are two properties half mile from me in Tuxedo Park undergoing this treatment right now. One on the corner of Woodhaven and West Paces Ferry, the other on Tuxedo Road, 2 houses away from Blackland. Builders won't be fined anything, and even if they were, any recompense would not benefit our neighborhood.
So one thing is, I think to your point, Mercy, we probably need to make sure that the fencing is chain link and so you can see through it. That would be one little help there. I think the other piece is that I believe, and if I could be corrected, somebody will correct me, I'm sure, that every tree removal can be counted as a fine. So every tree that gets removed could be an additional $1,000. I believe that's one thing that can happen, and it does happen when they do catch them. But I mean, to your point, that's why we need a better structured ordinance so that we can deal with the weekend cutters and eventually have people who continue to violate it no longer work in Atlanta. That's, just continuing to make improvements. I don't know if Judy got anything to add to that one.
Yeah, I think that's, I like that about the clarification on the opaque fencing. And the one thing about the clear cutting, and it also came through the chat, I had a moment to glance over there. Someone does ask about clear cutting. One of the things in the current ordinance that no one really liked was there was a cap on recompense. And as we noted in an earlier session, that cap has been removed. So now for every tree removed that qualifies for recompense and replanting are counted. This changes the economic proposition for any developer to clear cut. So we believe that that will have a big impact on single family homes. If they remove too many trees, they're going to be subject to the AMDA too, which is a restriction on how much length that can be disturbed. And at the end of the day, it comes down to if the soil is preserved and if it's left undisturbed, more trees are protected, whether it exists now or planted into the future. So it's a really powerful tool that way. I'm scanning through here. Let's see, please go over TA's position on right of appeal for anyone within the MPU. We pretty much would like for the standard to return to what it was. We asked for 2 amendments. One was when the yellow sign goes up, we would like that to be extended to 15 days and not 5 days as proposed. The other thing is we would like for, even if you meet the tree preservation standard, the city proposed that you can't appeal that except for abutting neighbors. We would like for anyone to be able to appeal that, and the sign should still be in place, because if this is a new day and these standards are good and the compliance is high and enforcement is there, The only reason in the current ordinance and the proposed ordinance that one can appeal is for inaccuracies. You can't appeal because you don't want the tree gone. If they meet the ordinance, they can remove the tree. So if those appeal rights are within the ordinance and the ordinance is good, we should open up the right to appeal at the NPU level. So we don't like that rollback, and we've recommended that it return to a more similar to what it was before. We are past the hour. I want to honor everyone's time. Greg and I are happy to stick on and answer a few more questions. But to those of you who have to drop off due to time, please remember that we will record everything, including any Q&As that continue for the next few minutes, and I will post it to the website. Okay, Greg, did you catch any other questions that we might have missed, sir?
No.
Okay.
I'm looking right now.
I thank you guys. It's been overwhelming. It is very complex. And one of the things that makes it so complex is no single standard can be looked at in isolation. They work together. And one of the reasons that we think that the ordinance could work, and at the end of the day, we still need proof, but it could work because it does present options. It's not just a set of standards or restrictions, but now it is providing options and incentives to preserve more trees. Those are the richest set of incentives per se in the ordinance. So the ordinance skews toward that tree preservation. And if you can't preserve, they restrict how much land that you can disturb. And then the recompense, if you can't do either, has been increased to meet true market costs of replacing a tree. So for those reasons, we start to dive into, does this really seem to work? We did some logic testing on it. And then we've asked a lot of people to do some field testing. That's what Greg and I are talking about when we say field testing is necessary. We're continuing to do that all the way up to the vote. We'll continue to do that. At the end of the day, we need some analysis to say one thing or another is going to work or isn't going to work. Absent that, if this ordinance passes a logic test, from what we can see, it could. We won't know until there's analysis.
Thank you, everybody. We appreciate your input and hopefully stay involved and keep on sending information. Thank you.